So I'm a marketing professor, and so one of the things that I teach very, very important to set expectations. So just before we even start, I want to let you know I will not be delivering one of these life-changing TED Talks like how to use a paper towel. Definitely not going to do that. I also won't be doing anything nearly as in-depth as how to tie your shoes. And I also, was looking through my closet this morning, and I realized I didn't even have a regular mushroom suit, let alone one for a special occasion. So I'm going to talk about something that I at least find very, very interesting, and it's something that has kind of propelled my work for the last couple of years, and that's names. So I'm sure many of you can relate to this, but when you're born with a last name like Itzkowitz, you think about your name a lot. You're constantly spelling your name for other people, you're constantly pronouncing it for other people, and inevitably this leads you to some questions, like what would my life be like if my name was shorter? Or what would my life be like if my name was easier to pronounce? Or what would it be like if it started with an A, so I could finally be at the front of the line rather than kind of stuck in the middle? So, as kids do, I asked my parents about this, and they're both educators and wanted to encourage learning. So they would always give me one of Shakespeare's most famous quotes: "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." So as a 7-year-old, you kind of take this as a blow-off, right? They're like, no, Jesse, names don't matter. It's what's inside that count. And changing your name to Captain Awesome isn't going to change any of that. And so, like kids do, it sort of comes in and out of importance to you. And eventually I found, football and comic books and high school and all of that good stuff. And all about names was forgotten until about 5 years ago when I learned I would be a father. So I said, yes, this is my chance. I can finally give my kid a name cooler than mine. So she's still going to be saddled with the last name Itzkowitz, but maybe I could give her a really, really killer first name. And so this is what started my study into names, both kind of casually, as well as with my own professional work. And there are kind of two areas that I'm really interested in. The first is how our names affect our own behaviors. Do names change the way that we behave as individuals? And of course, the flip side to that as well. How do our names influence the ways that other people act towards us? So the first thing I wanted to look at was how our names affect our own actions. And I didn't think that it was going to be the case that people were like consciously thinking like, I'm a Jesse, what should Jesse do? Or looking towards historical Jessies like Jesse James, otherwise I would have been a bank robber. Which, as a side note, after getting student emails after finals, seems like a wonderful profession. But that's not what I did. I really suspected that it would be more of an unconscious phenomena. And so I looked into kind of the marketing and psychology literature, which really has a good tradition of studying these subconscious influences on our decisions. And what seems to really be the core of our names, at least in this area, has to do with something called implicit egotism. And implicit egotism is the idea that, for a variety of reasons, we like ourselves. In fact, we love ourselves a lot. And so when we see things in the world that remind us of us, we're subconsciously attracted to those items. And name similarity is one of them. And one of the cool things about name similarity is that it leads to some really kind of astonishing but predictable effects. So one of them, which I think is pretty neat, is that when somebody's name is similar to ours, we're more likely to be attracted to them and to marry them. So my name is Jesse. My wife's name is Jennifer. We're also more likely to purchase items from brands that share name similarity. So Jennifer loves to buy things from J. Crew. We tend to live and work in places that share similarity with our names. So Jen works in Jersey. And Jen is a finance professor, or maybe a joyful finance professor. Okay, so that's lame and clearly doesn't work. But what their study does show is that men named Dennis and women named Denise are, all things equal, more likely to become dentists than people whose name don't begin with the letter D, E, and N. So I thought that that was pretty cool. It's like this is clearly affecting the decisions that we make. But how do our names affect other people's decisions towards us? And so The first place that I looked was economics, where there's a very rich tradition of looking at kind of people's outcomes. And one of the outcomes that we're very interested in are outcomes that are related to race, right? Race affects our physical health, our financial health, where we live, and how our quality of life is. And so if our names could influence this, or if our names are somehow tied to race, this could be very, very important. Well, some researchers looked at this, and what they did is they went to the Massachusetts Records Board, and they collected names. And what they did is over a 5-year period, they collected a list of the 10 most popular baby names given to white babies, and the 10 most popular names given to black babies. They then created a set of resumes that were equal in all possible ways, except for this one difference of name. And they sent them to all of the jobs that had listed postings in the local newspapers, classified section, in clerical work or customer service, administrative jobs. And what they found, unfortunately, was not that surprising. They found that on average, the white applicants received, or the applications with white names, received about 50% more callbacks than the applications that were submitted with black names. So clearly, names matter a lot. What's interesting about this is that while they found that this effect was really kind of seated in the implicit racial biases that all of us have within us, at its early levels, it wasn't unconscious at all. In fact, it was kind of the result of natural conscious inference making that you and I make every day. So if this was a conscious thought, then seriously, unconscious things could have a major effect. And that's what I chose to look at next. And so the first thing I looked at, of course, being an Itzkowitz, was how easy your name was to say. And it turns out there's a lot of benefits to having an easy name. And I think that one of the biggest benefits to having an easy name is that people like you more. And there's a psychological reason behind this, and it's called perceptual fluency. The idea of perceptual fluency is that when something is easy for us to perceive and figure out, it feels good. But our brain doesn't recognize that that good feeling comes from the ease with which we're processing it. And we misattribute that good feeling towards liking, towards the object itself. So this is why we might like a guy named Bob more than a guy like Shenghua or Maximilian. So it turns out there are other effects than liking as well. People with easier names are seen as more attractive. People with names that are easier to see are also seen as being more truthful. Neither of these things are good, by the way, if you're an Itzkowitz. So I decided to see what other effects do these have. And so some other research that was done by Adam Alter, he actually created a multiplayer stock market trading game. And what he found is that stocks that had easy to pronounce names actually ended up with the highest valuation at the end of his experiment. In my own work, where I've looked at the real stock market, I found similar results. Stocks with fluent names trade more often and do have higher valuations than other stocks. So there are big implications to having an easy-to-say name. The final thing that I want to talk about is something that I've been working on almost exclusively for the past year and a half, and that's alphabeticity. And so this all started, my fascination with alphabeticity, when I moved to a new neighborhood in the Lower East Side. And there in my neighborhood is one of the coolest stores I've ever seen, AAA avocados, AA avocados. All they do is sell avocados. They're cheap. Today they were $1 a piece, and they're usually pretty good. So I'm walking by, AAA avocados with my wife one night on the way out to dinner, and we're joking about how the name is really kind of an anachronism to a time where we almost exclusively use things like the phone book and the white pages to search for business information. And so what companies would do is they would actively try to outgame their competition by choosing a name that was higher in alphabetical order than their competitors, and thus kind of increasing the likelihood that they would be chosen. Well, this works, and it works for kind of two main psychological reasons. The first one's a simple one that we can all relate to. We're lazy. People are lazy. And then the second is the status quo bias. So let's talk about laziness first. All else equal, people don't want to expend either mental or physical energy. And this has consequences for the way that we search for information. Instead of searching for the best option, what we tend to do is search for the first available option that serves our needs. So you know all the times that you're searching for an avocado store. You'd go to the phone book and the first one you see, AAA avocados, well, it's an avocado store, meets my needs, I'll choose it. But of course, we live in a day and age where we're not using the phone book anymore. Lists that are presented to us are usually done electronically, and we have the opportunity to reorganize and reorder and resort the information however we want to. So does this still happen or not? Well, we predicted that maybe not, and this is due to the status quo bias. And this is a Nobel Prize winning idea, and the whole idea is based in loss aversion, which says that when we're given something as a default option, or when we're given a default list of options, we kind of view that as having ownership over it. And any change to that almost feels like a psychological loss to us. And so we don't reorder lists, even when we're given the opportunity to do so. So if this is the case, then if lists are presented alphabetically, even if we can reorder them, we kind of predicted that these early alphabet items would be chosen more often than later alphabet items. And so again, we decided to test this using the stock market or data from the stock market. And I did so for two main reasons. The first is that no matter where you look, stock market information is presented alphabetically. If you look in your newspaper listings, it's listed alphabetically. On any investment website, your options are typically listed alphabetically. If you go to any of the major exchanges, the items are listed alphabetically as well. The other reason why I chose the stock market is because this is something where people are literally invested, right? They have money riding on the outcomes of their decisions. And so people should try to be perfectly rational, right? They should try to maximize their gains and minimize their losses. And if this is the case, then alphabeticity shouldn't matter, right? People should simply be choosing the stock that's going to make them the most money. Well, it turns out that's not what happens at all, and alphabeticity does matter quite a bit. We found that early alphabet stocks trade more often and have higher valuations than all other stocks. We also found that this effect is increased when people are overloaded with information, and we actually show an increase in reliance on alphabeticity throughout the 1990s as the US public got more and more access to stock information through the internet. We also find differences in trader type. So it turns out people like you and me, individual at-home investors, we're really bad at this. We rely on the ABCs a lot, whereas institutional investors like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, their expertise allows them to be inoculated from this bias. More recently, I've also looked at this effect in 401k plans, and there too we see that alphabeticity matters and that people choose early alphabet stocks or plans, even when these plans have higher expense ratios, lower Morningstar ratings, and lower average returns over a 10-year period. So this really has a financial impact on people's lives, the fact that they're choosing alphabetically. So if this was limited to stocks, maybe we could at least pass a law that says you need to list stocks differently, but it turns that our world is alphabetized. And looking for a doctor the other day on my medical insurance website, the doctors are listed alphabetically. I'm a big wine guy, and so when I search for wines online, they're always listed alphabetically. All consumer products are typically listed alphabetically. And even when the New York Times decided to print a list of all the people, places, and things that Donald Trump had insulted during the campaign, they did so alphabetically. So we really see that there's a default bias to kind of list things alphabetically. And so, this really affects our actions or others' actions towards us. It's kind of where we are on that list. But it also turns out that alphabeticity might affect our own actions as well. And so we see evidence for this on a couple of different levels. The first, at my level as a professor, scholars with early alphabet names are actually chosen to review more articles and are cited more often in journals than authors with later alphabet names. For all of you who are maybe, hopefully be alumni one day, alumni with early alphabet names tend to be solicited for donations more often and give more than people with later alphabet names. And we can even think about how, this propensity to call on people with early alphabet names, happens in an elementary school. So you can just imagine, poor Moishe Zippel in the back of class on Halloween, waiting for his piece of candy as the teacher's handing them out alphabetically, thinking, is there going to be enough for me? Well, it turns out that this kind of nervousness, this feeling of left out does matter. And recent research from marketing shows that people with late last names tend to jump more quickly at limited time and limited quantity offerings. So alphabeticity really, really matters a lot, and names really matter a lot. And so there are three main takeaways that I'd like you all to have from my talk tonight. The first is, Mom, Dad, Shakespeare, if you're listening, you're wrong. Names matter. And it turns out that a rose by another name probably would not smell as sweet. So there. The second thing is that be aware that names matter. And one of the things that we're working on right now is to see that by actually being aware of the power that names have, can you actually de-bias yourself from their effects? And we see some evidence that just even thinking about it to lessen the effect of name bias. And the third thing is, you're making an important decision and you have to look at a list. Think about the criteria that are important to you first, and go ahead and reorder the list before you even start searching. And that will really help eliminate any alphabeticity or name order bias that's there. And in fact, one of the recommendations that we make to policymakers is that for financial products, they really should be listed by increasing expense ratio so people don't spend money needlessly. So just to jump back for a second to my own life, so I'm facing this decision and I'm going to name my first kid, what should I think of? Well, maybe I wanted her to be first, so I thought Abigail was a pretty great name for her. She'd be first for everything. As I said before, I'm really into wine, and so one of the best wine jobs you can have is to become a sommelier, where you get to taste great wines and eat at fantastic restaurants all over the world. So I said Sommer. My wife said absolutely not. And then, having a little bit of implicit egotism, didn't Jessica make a great name? Well, in the end, we went with absolutely none of these. We named our daughter Zoe after her grandmother, and Molly after my wife's father. And you know what? I think that their names suit them perfectly. Thank you very much for your time today.